Is being Jewish a choice? Yes. Yes, it is. Generally speaking, social constructs are choices. But just because they are choices does not mean that they can't be imposed on people. So a social construct can be imposed upon you, even though it is a social construct. And in that situation, you could make the argument that it's not a choice because you don't have any capacity to control what other people are doing. But I'll get to that when I get to that. So let's start here. I got into an argument with a Jewish supremacist that thinks that Jews are God's chosen people, even though he's an atheist, which is just typical of these idiots. Jewish supremacists are incredibly stupid people that make incredibly bad arguments and don't understand science. So I'm not going to read every little thing here because it actually does go on for quite some time, but I'll just like kind of you can read along and I'll just kind of paraphrase, the argument here. And we get into an argument about, he predictably calls me anti-Semitic because that's what dumb Jewish supremacists do when they don't have arguments. They call people anti-Semitic even though they're not Semitic people in lieu of an argument because they're too dumb to make an argument. And of course, I point out that white Jews are not Semitic people and that Ashkenazis did not speak a Semitic language. They spoke Yiddish, which is a Germanic language. And a Zionist named Eliezer ben Yehuda was the one who revived Hebrew, because Hebrew was a dead language before. And he had to, this Zionist, Eliezer ben Yehuda, had to steal words from Arabic in order to revive it. And by the way, that revival was opposed by the founder of Zionism himself, Theodor Herzl, and also religious Jews who I consider to actually be real Jews. These atheist fake Jews are not real Jews. But that's a different story. It was opposed by religious Jews because they believed that it wasn't right and it was sacrilege to use a holy, sacred language for mundane things. I'm going to go take a shit would be a mundane thing to say in the ancient Hebrew language, but that's exactly what they did. So, of course, this moron tries to gaslight. And, when I pointed out that Eliezer ben Yehuda stole words from Arabic in order to modernize it, he claims that he didn't steal it, he quote unquote borrowed it. And I pointed out how Theodor Herzl was an atheist, and then he admits that he's an atheist because, of course, he is, and he also believes that Jews are God's chosen people. And then he uses the usual ethno-religious group. No, no, it's not. Okay, Jews are not an ethno-religious group because anyone can convert and become a Jew. And in fact, conversion to Judaism was very common in the past, and it still happens. It just doesn't happen as frequently as it does with Islam. And of course, the Jewish supremacists thinks that writing in all caps and yelling and calling people fucking and idiot is a good argument. And he says race and ethnicity aren't the same thing, which the problem is that he, in the context that he's using the words, he is using the word ethnicity as a relabeling of race because in Zionism, Jew was originally considered to be a race. They didn't even have the word ethnicity back then. In the late 1800s, the word ethnicity didn't even exist. It was coined in the 1950s. It was only changed from race to ethnicity when race was debunked as a pseudoscience. And by the way, that's the reason why they used the word anti-Semitism, because at the time, they believed that Jews were a separate race called Semitic people. They believed that they were Semites. That was the name of their race. And so they wanted a word that was scientific sounding because they wanted it to be consistent with race theory, because they believed it was a science back then. But now we know it's not. It was debunked as a pseudoscience. So the word anti Semitism is actually just a vestige of race theory, the age of race realism. And of course, the Jewish supremacist, when he can't argue with me, he tries to run away. I'm not going to engage with you anymore. Now, The Jewish supremacist admits that race isn't real, but since he's a moron, he can't mitigate the cognitive dissonance that's going on in his head because there's a conflict. Because he understands that race is a social construct. He's saying it isn't real. I don't really agree with that. Social constructs can still be real as abstract concepts. And then I challenge him and I ask him, how is ethnicity different from race? And in the context of Zionism, it isn't any different. The way they use the word Jew is synonymous with race. That's the reason why they use the word anti-Semitism, because they believed it was a race. It's not like Herschel was the only person using race, and that is true. Theodore Herschel wasn't the only one. It was believed by both Jews and non-Jews at the time because it was accepted as science back then. They didn't know any better. The difference is that smart people actually wised up, whereas dumb people, like Jewish supremacists like this, cling to this social construct. So here he says, I never said it was a biological construct, but he's going to contradict himself because I challenge him that ethnicity has no basis in DNA. And at first he acquiesces to this and admits that it's correct. But then he realizes how he fucked up because that's exactly how Jewish supremacists, I shouldn't even say Jewish supremacists, that Jews believe that defines what being Jewish is. They believe that it's based in DNA, and it's not. It has no basis in DNA. It's just an arbitrary social construct. It's not an indelible trait. You're called dumb. Of course, ad hominems are what Jewish supremacist imbeciles do. I just admitted that I changed my mind. How convenient. This guy is, I think he's young. I think he's like a young kid, and evidently a very stupid kid, too. So he admits that race is bullshit, but he can't admit that ethnicity, in the way that he's using it, is bullshit. Now, ethnicity does actually have valid purpose in the study of anthropology, but anthropologists discourage the use of ethnicity for contemporary people because then it just becomes synonymous with race. Ethnicity has use in understanding ancient people because there's an incomplete historical record, and ethnicity helps researchers understand these ancient people a little bit better, but the ethnic terms that they use are ascribed to these people. They're not described, which means that these ethnic groups did not call themselves by these ethnic labels. That's very important. So he's getting very, very confused because he can't reconcile the fact that, yeah, Jews do define Jewish identity based upon DNA, which is total bullshit. You can't determine if someone's a Jew based upon DNA or a person's genome. So what this means is that, a Jew who advances Jew race science masquerading under the moniker of ethnicity will say, well, we could do DNA tests. I'm just going to do my best Jewish hick accent, I guess. We can do DNA tests on Jews to see that they have common DNA. And yeah, like for Ashkenazi Jews that live in, insular, highly religious communities, and honestly are inbreeding a lot, yeah, I would imagine that they would have similar DNA because they're inbreeding a lot. However, what you can't do is you can't look at a person's genome and then determine whether or not that person is Jewish. So it doesn't work the other way. And this is why we know that it's total bullshit, because I could show a geneticist the genome of a zebra, and the geneticist will be able to determine that, yes, this animal is a zebra. This is the genome of a zebra. But you can't give a geneticist a genome, and that's it. And then they can determine whether or not this person is a Jew or not. They can't do that because Jewish identity is not determined by genome. So he's just really, and also it's interesting, he's taking shots at PragerU. Dennis Prager's a Jew, and he would agree with basically everything this Jewish supremacist is saying. He's like one of these like liberal Jews that really gaslight liberals into advancing Jewish supremacy. Here's one of his best arguments. Oh my effing God, you stupid fuck. We are an ethnicity because we say we are. That's a great argument. So if you say you're an Apache gunship, does that mean you're a gunship too? You are right that ethnicity has little basis in genetics. I said it has zero basis in genetics. So look at all these caps. What a dumbass. Um, when did race theory begin? So I'm trying to reason with him. I'm trying to get him to understand that race theory began in the late 1800s, which is exactly when Zionism began. But he's too stupid to put the pieces together. Jews are an ethnicity. We have come to realize that. No, it's not. At best, the only thing I'm willing to grant is that Ashkenazis are an ethnicity. But even then, you really shouldn't be using the word ethnicity to refer to contemporary people. It should really only be used in a historical context. Okay, anyone can convert and become a Jew. And eventually, I do challenge him to provide the defining characteristics of a Jew. Because if you're going to say that there is some kind of objective delineation of what a Jew is, then there should be defining characteristics of what a Jew is. And of course, he can't define what the defining characteristics are. So he tries to say here, and this is going to be like a word salad. If ethnicity is a social construct, how is it the same as saying you are something that you literally aren't? It's the same idea with gender identity. One can have male genitalia, yet still identify as something else. Identity is different from concrete facts. It's fluid and defined by being acknowledged. So I kind of get what he's trying to say here. He's trying to equivocate ethnicity with gender, basically within the context of trans, because he's a liberal Jew and a stupid Jew at that. Social constructs are not above reproach. They can be critiqued. And that's true. Okay, social constructs can be critiqued if they're stupid. Sure, but people can also disagree with those critiques. Yeah, you're not doing a good job defending your social construct of being a Jew, especially when you're an atheist. You can say Jews aren't an ethnicity all you want, but if Jews say they are, they effectively are. Here's the problem with that. It's because it's based on race. Okay, so therefore, when you just assert and dig your feet in and say, no, I'm a Jew, I'm a Jew, and you're trying to use that Jewish identity to give yourself privileges in life, yeah, it can be critiqued. You're not above reproach. All you're doing is you are redefining ethnicity to be synonymous with race. And so, therefore, it can be critiqued. So I say that's besides the point. You admit that I can critique a social construct. So if you identify as a third gender, I can critique it on a variety of different grounds. So I'm trying to get to the point, the part of where, I found it. Now, before I get to that, though, he's saying it isn't really because you would be engaging in racism at that point. You stupid fuck. Look, you idiot. Science does not give a fuck about whether or not something is anti-Semitic. It doesn't care about whether something is discriminatory, and doesn't care about whether or not something is racist. If it's true, it's true. That's all science cares about. Okay, saying that's anti-Semitic, you can't say that. That's not an argument when we're talking about science. All science cares about is whether it's real. Okay, and Jew being whatever the hell he wants to call it, an ethnicity, that is not that does not have any basis in DNA, in or biology. Okay, it's just a relabeling of race. No, I reject that. And then he's trying to say denying identity is a form of discrimination. Same deal. I don't care if it's discriminatory. I care about whether or not it's real, and that's all science cares about. So I say, you thinking you're a Jew is not an indelible trait. It is a social construct. As such, you are choosing to be a Jew because you say so, not because of objective reality or anything innate with you. Then here the Jew colors really come out. I didn't choose to be a Jew. I was born into it. Actually, you did. Look, social constructs, if they are not imposed, they are chosen. Okay? Now, in all fairness, yes, a social construct can be imposed upon you. So, for example, you might challenge what I just said here and say, well, if race is a social construct, do people have a choice? Can you renounce your race? Can you renounce being white? Can you choose to not be white or black? And the answer to that is yes, you can, but you have a very limited ability to influence others from imposing those racial categories onto you. That's just how society is. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just that's the way our society is. Maybe we should strive for something better than that, but that's just where we are right now. I don't think it's racist to just say, "Oh yeah, that's a black guy and that's a white guy." We do it all the time, despite what some people would have you believe, we do see race. And but the fact is that you can renounce your race, but you have a very limited ability to influence others from imposing race onto you. Now, when it comes to Jew, it's a completely different situation because unless you express as a Jew in some profound way, like the way you dress, or living in a Jewish neighborhood with other Jews, or going to synagogue, or going to temple, or doing this and doing that, doing Jewish things, unless you express as a Jew in a social way, people are not going to know that you are a Jew because there are no defining physical characteristics of what a Jew is, which is what I challenge him to do. I say right here, you can see, what are your defining Jewish traits? And he can't answer. That's besides the point because he doesn't have an answer. There are no defining Jewish traits. Okay? Anyone can be a Jew. And I already pointed out many times Arabs were Jews before Ashkenazis even existed. So, what I'm trying to say here is that no one is imposing upon him or any other Jews to be a Jew. While it is true that race is oftentimes imposed, Jewish identity isn't. Okay? Not by anyone that, not, maybe by your parents at best, maybe by your family, maybe by your community if you're living in a highly religious neighborhood. But we're putting all that aside for a minute. When it comes to just living in a normal society with other men and women and boys and girls in society. It's not. It is not. No one is going up to you and saying, you're a Jew. No, you're choosing to be a Jew. And even more egregiously, you are selectively choosing when to be a Jew. This Jew is not a Jew whenever, in 99% of his life. He's only a Jew when he wants to pretend that he's a victim. When it comes to his Jewish identity politics, Israel, and Zionism, then he's a Jew. But outside of that context, he's not a Jew, and he doesn't suffer from any discrimination, no anti-Semitism. This guy did not experience an ounce of anti-Semitism, anti-Jewish, whatever the hell you want to call it, in his life. He just coasted through life as a white boy. And then when it's convenient for him to pretend like he's a victim, then he's a Jew. And yes, that is a choice. You're choosing to be a Jew. No one else is doing it to you. You're choosing to do it. That's how social constructs work. If it's not being imposed, it's a choice. Okay? But what isn't a choice is something that actually is grounded in some kind of physical science, some kind of objective reality. Okay? So, for example, being a human being, that is what we are. We are human. That actually has a basis in science and reality. The way we look, there is a racial, when we say that race is a social construct, we're talking about the racial categories that go with it. But we don't have any choice in how we look. So if you have dark skin, um, the way your face looks, hey, you can do plastic surgery, but most people don't do that. So we have very limited ability to change the way that we look and how we were born and how we develop. We have very limited or no ability to influence those things. So all that stuff, yeah, we didn't choose that stuff. But none of that has to do with being a Jew. Okay? It is purely a social construct that has no indelible traits. So hopefully that drives home the point here is that being Jewish is a choice. It's not imposed. And it's not indelible because it is not a biological construct at all. It is a social construct, and it's not an ethnicity either. See ya.